Welcome to the CFB Dynasty Podcast with hosts Matt Knowles and Brian McElfish.
Hey everybody, how you doing out there? This is the CFBDynasty.com podcast. My name is Matt Knowles, as always joined by the founder and the creator, Brian McElfish. And underneath him, don't call him number one. You can always call him number two. It's Doug Gravely. Today, we're going to be talking about the top 500 overall wide receiver seasons of all time. We're going to basically touch on a few of the ones that are down the list. We're going to go over the top 25. One of the great things about this list, unlike quarterbacks and running backs, wide receivers are a ton of guys that if you're not really in depth with the college game, you're going to have no idea who a lot of these guys are, because one thing you're going to find out is the college game does not translate over to the pro game in a lot of ways. BMAC, Doug, what were your initial thoughts when you saw this list?
Oh, man, there's just so many people that I don't know. So many people I've never heard of. But I guess that's what makes this fun, is I get to look into these guys a little bit and figure out who they are. But there were just so many people that I'm like, who in the world is that?
What about you, BMAC?
So, I guess one of the most surprising things, kind of looking at this list here, of course, I'm looking for players that I saw as great NFL players too, but tight ends make this list also, and then and at number 39. So he doesn't make the list of who we're going to talk about, but seeing this tight end who just crushed it early on in our CFB Dynasty, home league was so incredible. His stats are pretty awesome. And as a tight end to come in at number 39, that's pretty awesome.
All right, so before we get to the list, I'm going to ask a quick question. Just got done as a guest at Collective Con Jacksonville this past weekend. Was a great show, 4th year in a row that I've been a guest up at that show. When you're at a Comic-Con, people are going to be dressed up. We have a buddy of ours, Blake Morgan, who just went to Planet Comic-Con in Kansas City. Big Kansas City fan. The dude is a dead ringer for Andy Reid, if Andy Reid was like 20 years younger. So I'm going to pose the question to BMAC and to Doug. So if you had to go to a Comic-Con and you had to dress up as somebody in sports, who would you be and why? Doug, I'm throwing it to you first.
So I would be Ted Lasso from the TV show, man. It's not like a real sports face, but I just love that TV show, man. It makes you laugh, makes you cry, makes you angry. And I feel like I can get those emotions out of anybody. So I would probably be Ted Lasso.
You're telling me Ted Lasso's not real? Next thing you're going to say is Easter Bunny's not real.
Hey, I wish everybody did press conferences like Ted Lasso. That's all I can say.
What about you, BMAC? Who would you dress up as?
So it didn't take me long in my younger years to just despise dressing up for Halloween. And so that's basically all I did. Was I would dress up as just some random Gators coach by putting on a hat and putting on like a jacket or a polo. And so I would go as any random fan. I've always been more boring than you, Matt, in that regard. So no surprise.
So basically, we're gonna say that you're Steve Spurrier.
Sure. Yeah.
All right.
My childhood hero. There you go.
What about you, Matt?
I always go and dress up as myself, but I don't even think about who I would dress up as otherwise. I don't even know.
Andy Reid baby from the playoffs like a couple years ago, or the regular season was hilarious.
That was good.
I always dress up as myself, which is amazing because, if you've seen any of the books that we do, one of the characters looks just like me, and it's not because it's me, but because the very first artist, I said, hey, I did the cosplay, and I said, this is what we want the character to look like, and he drew him to look so much like me. I knew right then, I'm like, this is going to make Comic-Cons easy for the rest of my life, because if I just dress up like me, I'm going to be looking like my books, and that's literally what happens.
I like it.
Yeah, I might go dressed up as BMAC. You know what I'm saying? I might put on a basketball jersey, number 3. I might go in there and then knock down a few threes on whatever basketball hoop they have in there. That might be what I do.
He's definitely a sports face. Definitely a sports face, man.
All right, so let's get back to the topic of the day. We got the top 500 list. We're going to go through the top 25. BMAC, for those that have not watched the first two shows in this series, let them know how this data was derived, how far back we go, and what the criteria is used to be able to rank who is actually going to be on this list.
Yeah. All right. So it really just started with a thought on some random weekend, and then I spent the whole weekend collecting data and kind of just writing formulas or whatever to calculate fantasy stats. So we go back. This list is not technically all time. It goes currently from 1980 all the way to the present day, and I took the top 100 receivers from every season, 100-ish, some of them a little bit more, and then rank them based on the data. So because there's a huge variance in games, we didn't do total fantasy points. We do have that metric in the data, so you can see it and re-rank it, sort it, however you want there. It's currently ranked based on how many fantasy points per game, but there's a minimum threshold, so we didn't want someone that just balled out for 5 games and then got hurt make it on this list. So I think the minimum game threshold, I can't remember what it is, like 8 or 9. And then fantasy points per game is there. So some incredible seasons, and let's get to it.
All right. So BMAC, why don't you go ahead and pull up the list? Start about 30. That way we can we don't have to show off anybody in our top 25 just yet. All right. So one of the things you guys are going to notice when you look at this list, unless you're somebody that is a deep dive and you've been playing college fantasy for a long time, like BMAC and myself, there's going to be a lot of names on this list that you're just going to be like, who? Because the wide receiver game in college does not translate to the pros, like we said at the beginning. There's a lot of times where wide receivers are running wide open in college, playing against inferior secondaries. And guys can put up incredible numbers in college, but they just cannot latch on in the pros in any way, because in the pros, being completely covered is open. Where in college you can be running, patterns to be 5-10 yards open on every single play. So a couple guys that did not make the list, names that you might, Brian already mentioned at 39, you got James Casey from Rice. BMAC, not sure if you want to say anything more about him.
Well, 111 catches. I remember Mike Davis had him in our league, and it was like a total unfair advantage. If you can land a tight end that's putting up numbers that rank with, you think about like the season that, let's say here, let me scroll through the list a little bit. Like Tank Dell is the number 1 receiver from this past year. And James Casey crushed that season as a tight end. So yeah, it's just nuts. Anyways, 111 catches, 1,300 receiving yards, 13 touchdowns catching, and then 241 rushing yards and 6 more touchdowns on the ground. 25 fantasy points per game as a tight end. That it just always is shocking. And it's kind of around that era where after that you had Florida using not Andre Reed. That's the old Bills receiver, Jordan Reed, a tight end / quarterback. And then Burton did the same stuff at Florida. And then you had Tannehill at Texas A&M. But Casey was the one who really started that trend. I feel like maybe not quite started it, but he was the one that I most remember from our early days in the fantasy league. This was a 2008 season at Rice.
So you look up there at 37, you got Zay Jones, who's finally starting to do something in the pros. It took him forever. He languished on the bench and didn't really do much at all after that huge season at East Carolina in 2016. Just barely missed the list. Corey Coleman from Baylor, another guy that had a great season, just completely disappeared, did not do anything in the pros. But then you scroll up to number 34 and you got my boy Torry Holt from NC State. That was back when NC State wasn't a great program, but they had some great guys like Torry Holt and Phillip Rivers. And Torry Holt was lighting up the ACC at that time. Josh Doxson at 32 from TCU, a guy that everybody thought was going to be a baller in the pros and has completely disappeared. Pretty much of a disappointment once he got off of TCU's team. Andy Isabella at 29 is floating around practice squads and the bottom half of depth charts, but he's still in the pros. Tavon Austin, a guy that was unbelievable at West Virginia at 28. Then you go to number 27. This was the first one. If you were like, what's something that surprises you on the list? Again, we were talking about the top 25, but here's some things that are really surprising. Jarrett Stearns from Western Kentucky. Not a name that many people know outside of the deep fantasy football realm, but you should know. Jarrett Stearns, 2 years ago in college, 150 receptions, 1,902 yards. That's a dude that if he was a running back, he would have probably been a top 5 pick in the NFL draft, because you don't put up running back numbers, 1,902 yards by accident. But Western Kentucky, a school that was just throwing the ball around like there was no business, he got 1,902 yards and is basically invisible when it comes to the pro ranks. BMAC, anybody else you want to talk about outside the top 25 before we get into those top 25 names?
I've got some as we go through the questions that we have for the show, but nobody else really specifically. But also, if you look at what we did last week with running backs, so around the same area here, it's just a little bit different points per game. So it's about a 5 points per game advantage for running backs, 4 specifically, I guess. So you got top running backs in the 26, 27 range. They're averaging a little 30, 31 points a game. So receivers are a little bit less, but yeah, I'm ready to get to it.
All right, so let's show off the next group of 5, 21 through 25. So at 25,
right.
We got 25 Golden Tate from Notre Dame. BMAC, I know that's a guy that you had your eyes on a lot. Let's talk a little bit about Golden Tate.
So I had Michael Floyd back in the day, and I think he makes it on the very bottom of this list. But yeah, Tate's been a really good player for a while and was solid in the NFL, better than I thought he would be. But he makes the list. Yeah, Richie James, of course, at Middle Tennessee State. Really well known, I feel like, if you're in fantasy.
He's bouncing around on practice squads. He's been on the 49ers, up and back and forth from the practice squad to the regular roster.
Yeah, 105 catches that 2016 year, 1,600 yards, 12 touchdowns, another 340 on the ground, and 4 more touchdowns on the ground. So he was great and super consistent as a collegiate player.
Doug, up next, a couple of names that you're probably familiar with. Nate Burleson at Nevada, Larry Fitzgerald at Pitt. You've heard of this guy, Larry Fitzgerald, have you not?
I have heard of Larry Fitzgerald for sure. Man, he was just one that was known for just running great routes. He had some of the best hands I've ever seen, and he was smart, like just a really smart receiver. Like it was one of those things that it was like he knew what play was going to be called before it was called, kind of. He just always seemed to be there for his quarterback to throw to. I mean, he was great. Loved watching him. Like I said, some of the best hands I've ever seen. So
Larry Fitzgerald, one of the few guys that actually lived up to the hype coming out of college to be able to get into this top of this list. And then Rashard Higgins at Colorado State. When Rashard Higgins was at Colorado State, they were throwing the ball all over the place. I'm pretty sure that he helped lead a couple of guys to college fantasy championships with that ridiculous 96 catches, but 1,750 yards receiving. That is a ridiculous yards per catch average right there.
And we can't just pass by Nate Burleson there, like one of the best guys on TV. He's so good.
He is good. Super good.
All right, let's roll up to 16 through 20.
Elijah Moore at 20 for Ole Miss. Great season. He's still waiting to get his turn, basically as a lead target in the NFL. But 86 catches, 1,190 yards, 8 touchdowns. And just think about the transition of Ole Miss from 2020 to current, where now they're pushing out some of the top fantasy running backs with one of the best Power 5 rushing attacks in the country. How about 19, Matt? What do you remember about Ashley Lally?
I can tell you right now, Hawaii, not as much now because you've had a lot of attrition and people transferring out of Hawaii. But for decades, Hawaii was just nonstop with the run and shoot. June Jones offense was just passing the ball like you couldn't believe. I mean, everybody, you go into a college draft and everybody, it didn't matter if it was the fifth wide receiver on Hawaii, those guys were going to get drafted because you didn't know what guy was going to blow up. Lally is a little bit prior to when we started doing CFB Dynasty, but I still remember the name and remember that he was one of those guys that you had on your radar and just helped you to, hey, when we start doing this very first draft, we need to make sure that we get some Hawaii wide receivers on our team.
Yeah, actually, do you want to skip up real quick to the best, like the wide receiver U rankings, which how
Absolutely.
many teams? This is a good little transition. So if you scroll up on the page a little bit here, here's the top 10 schools. What do you think about this, Matt?
So I was not surprised at all to see Texas Tech, Hawaii, and Houston as three of the top 4 schools. Those are schools that are known for putting out just incredible wide receivers, passing the ball all over the place. You're talking about, if you go back to the quarterback show, we talked about how Houston and Texas Tech have always put out just absolutely insane video game numbers at the quarterback position. It is very surprising to see Florida at number 6, but I am most surprised to see Western Michigan and Louisiana Tech in the top 10. You don't think, you might have a season here or there where a school would do good and they might jump up. I know Bowling Green had a couple of years where they were throwing the ball all over the place, but to consistently over a 40-year span see Western Michigan and Louisiana Tech put guys on this list and then go, did any of these guys actually make it into the pros? I think maybe one Louisiana Tech guy actually did something worthwhile, but most of it was a cap. You do great in college and then you're done. What do you think? What do you guys think about these lists?
So like USC and Florida sitting there tied with 12 of the top 500 seasons. It's not so surprising to me because Florida, well, I guess if you're 20 years old, it's super surprising to you. But, they were one of the first teams to pass the ball around a lot in the SEC, where Spurrier kind of changed the game for the SEC back in the 90s. So it's not super surprising. And some of the names on the list just take me back to childhood. And it's great to see Oklahoma State being there at 7. Gundy, what he's done there has been incredible. And he's still there churning out some good fantasy, running backs, receivers for us, quarterbacks. It's been a great run for him there at Oklahoma State. And then Western Michigan at 10. They've been a really consistent, like group of 5 type of team. And then Purdue 9th, Louisiana Tech 10th, with 8 seasons in our top 500. So good stuff. Anything stand out to you there, Doug?
I was just going to hit a little bit on, like you already mentioned it, Florida. If you're looking at Florida nowadays, it's surprising that they're on there, But if you watch Florida back when they had, some of the greats that we'll talk about, later on that we all liked to watch, it's not surprising. But there's just a lot of teams that their game has just changed around, from passing to running or vice versa.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
All right, so back to the tops, or 16 through 20. We hit on Lally. So look at Jordan White at 18. We just talked about Western Michigan. In 2011, he had the 3rd highest yards overall on our list at 1,911 yards receiving, which is just incredible. But that's also part of where you get MACtion from. You talk about your Tuesday and Wednesday night games because the MAC is throwing the ball all over the place, even all the way back to 2011. Jordan White, coming close to hitting 2,000 yards receiving, which is incredible. Brandon Cooks. Brandon Cooks is probably the most attempted to be traded wide receiver in the history of the world. If you are in a league with our boy Mike Dillingham, he always tries to include Brandon Cooks in a trade. It doesn't matter what the trade is. I think one year he tried to trade me Brandon Cooks 15 times. And he was successful 0. But yeah, if you're in a league with Mike Dillingham, You've probably had a trade where he was trying to get you Brandon Cooks. But Brandon Cooks back in the day, he was incredible at Oregon State, and he's done some stuff in the pros, but he definitely has not been at the same level in the pros as he was back in the day at Oregon State. And then the last one in the 16 to 20 group, you got Brian Reeves from Nevada, another school that you'll see the name a lot. Back in 1993, another guy that didn't really do anything outside of college, but he had 10 games, 91 receptions, 1,362 yards. Anything else you guys want to say about the group of 16 to 20 before we move on to 11 through 15?
Nope.
No, let's do it.
All right, 11 through 15's got a bunch of names that are going to be super fun here. So Stedman Bailey at 15, a guy that made it into the pros, didn't really do much in the pros, but still had an incredible season. Here,
let me ask you a question, Matt. So, how hard is it here to take someone like Stedman Bailey in like a Devy league where he's produced so well for you in college? How hard is it to trade a guy like that when he's going on to your NFL team? Obviously, hindsight being 2020, it would be ideal to trade him there. That's the height of his value, probably. How hard is it to do that for you?
Oh, I think it's incredibly hard, and I think you're asking the right guy that question, because last year I had 5 guys that were productive, very good productive guys on my college team that all went to the pros, and some of them weren't even able to latch on with a free agent contract. They didn't even make it into a camp. Some of them, I think the highest I had was a guy that was drafted I had one guy in the first round that was injured, and then I think after that it was a 5th round receiver. And it's hard when because you feel like you have a loyalty to these guys that have done so good for you, know what they can do. It's really difficult. I think I've got to probably do a better job. So Doug, you might have a couple of trade offers coming your way when we get off of the show, because I'm known for having guys that go onto my pro team and don't do squat. I mean, it doesn't mean don't have guys that aren't going to be really good, but it's hard to tell who the guy that's going to be the stud and the guy that's going to be the dud.
Yeah,
it
is
send
hard.
Your trade offers my way, guys. Send them my way.
Well, NFL GMs struggle with this kind of stuff too, because you could have, kind of probably done the same thing with the guy who's number 12 on the list, and you'd have been pretty disappointed if you did that.
Right. Speaking about on the list, number 14, Aaron Turner. He snuck in the list. He should not be on this list. Look at him from an FCS school jumping in here and getting on the list. Aaron Turner. I don't even know what the heck you're doing on this list, but get your heck out of here, man. So then Eugene Baker, Kent State, 1997, 103 receptions, 1,549 yards. Then we get to get to some good names. Devontae Adams, my boy from Fresno State. I've been a fan of Devontae Adams from his freshman year in college. Back in the day, him and Derek Carr, just an unbelievable combination. Wish they would have been able to have the same success at the Raiders and the pros. But Devontae Adams back in that season, in 2013, 131 receptions, 1,719 yards, 24 touchdowns. Devontae Adams is a guy that probably is never going to see another roster in our league. He was on my team in college. Probably going to just ride with him until he gets onto my team's Hall of Fame in the CFB Dynasty Home League, because he's just always been a good, incredible receiver. Why would I trade a guy that's been loyal to me?
Yeah, I'm going to build that on the site, the Hall of Fame. That'll be good. I
be good.
Have some notes on that. Anyways, does it get any better in fantasy when you've got that elite quarterback wide receiver stack?
It's
having a quarterback and receiver on the same team. Yeah, I don't think it gets any better than that.
It's incredible. And I had Devontae and Derek Carr in college together. So you're talking about them throwing all over, Mountain West secondaries that just, didn't have a clue. I mean, that was such an incredible combination. I mean, did it give me a championship? Let's not talk about that. But it still was fun to watch him throw the ball all over the place. BMAC, I know you got some love for the guy at number 11. Talk about number 11.
Yeah, man. Randy Moss from Marshall. His 1997 season, 96 catches, 1,800 yards, and a cool 26 touchdowns. Good for 29.7 fantasy points a game. One of the best wide receivers of all time. Be shocked if he's not in your top 2. Honestly, I would have to question everything about you at that point if he's not in your top 2 all time for the NFL. But he was just a star. Chad Pennington. Chad Pennington was his college quarterback. Yep. And he played high school basketball with Jason Williams, who was a Florida boy. And Moss was great at basketball too. I got to watch him in a local celebrity basketball game here in Ocala when he was here for his NFL quarterback, or one of them, Dante Culpepper, threw a little game. Had Edgerrin James here in Ocala, a little Central Florida town, and it was a blast seeing Randy Moss roll up in this massive black bus. And but yeah, what an incredible talent! Like just the way he would fly down the field, paired with his jumping ability, just ridiculous.
And Moss, there was a lot of controversy around him when he went to Marshall, because he was with another Power 5 school. There was a lot of negative talk about Randy Moss then. But I remember watching Moss back in that era. I remember very clearly them in playing at Marshall, and it was a completely snowed over field, and one of those kind of games where you would expect to be nothing but running because the field had so much snow on it. And I remember the Pennington to Moss combination in that game just went absolutely ape. And I knew right then, I'm like, this guy is the real deal. He is going to become one of the best of all time. And he showed that he was absolutely one of the best of all time.
And he was supposed to be at Florida State. That would have been wild watching him play in that offense, with all the weapons that they had at FSU at the time. Would have been nuts. But yeah, he killed it at Marshall anyways. I'm going to roll on up.
Just roll up to number 10. Number 10, Freddie Barnes from Bowling Green in the MAC. That was back when Bowling Green was actually putting out some talent. That was talked about last week when I had my running back situation where I took the wrong player. I actually took a Bowling Green quarterback instead of my running back from UTEP. Cost me a championship, and I'll never live that down for the rest of my days. But Freddie Barnes, 2009, 155 receptions, 1,770 yards. Doug, wouldn't you love to have a guy like that on your team in the 2023 season?
Oh, for sure. I mean, that's a lot of catches, dude. 155 catches in 1 year is a lot. The crazy thing about it, and I'm going to go back to number 11 real fast, is if you look at the numbers and the production in 96 receptions compared to 155, like Randy Moss averaged 19 yards a catch. That means Freddie Barnes averaged like 11. But 11 yards a catch is still great when you're catching it 155 times. Like,
absolutely.
The way that our league is set up, when we get points for each and all that, and I would hope most leagues are, but I mean that's a lot of points you're getting for a lot of catches. Like,
by the way, this really matters when you're talking about Freddie Barnes or Devontae Adams, who had 131 catches. This is a half point PPR. So if this was full point PPR, Barnes would be even higher on this list.
And I think too that to continue on with your thought there, Doug, that just also shows between 1997 and 2009 how much the college game offenses have changed. Where in 1997 you weren't seeing a lot of bubble screens and things where it was just get the ball in the wide receiver's hands and let them act like they're a running back. And right. I think that when you got to 2009, that was a lot of the offense where you're going to see a lot of bubble screens, a lot of just get the ball in the wide receiver's hands 1 or 2 yards away from the line of scrimmage and treat it like it's just an extended part of the running game. So I think that's really what you can see in the difference between 10 and 11. But if we roll up to number 9, another guy that is still on my that was a college to pro guy for me that is probably not ever going to go anywhere is the next Devontae on the list, Devontae Smith. If you go back to I
had to coax you to bring him off your practice squad this year.
Man, you didn't have to coax me. It was one game, man. I got a lot of wide receivers, man. It was one game. But Devontae Smith, here's the guy we talked about how Alabama, it's a school that just produces wide receivers like nobody's business up until last year. And Devontae Smith was one of those that if you were able to get your hands on Devontae Smith prior to him becoming the starter, prior to him becoming one of the top 2 guys, you're probably sitting pretty now, which is exactly what I was able to do. Got Devontae, graduated up onto my pro team. Again, I don't see him going anywhere. I see him going to be just like Devontae Adams. He's going to hang around, probably become part of my my college to pro Hall of Fame. 117 yards, 1,856, 117 receptions, 1,856 yards. Was also the recipient of the Tua long touchdown to win the national championship after Jalen Hurts was benched in the national championship game. So Devontae Smith was a part of history in that game as well.
For real though, Matt, like just an aside here, you've talked about Devontae Adams, Devonta Smith. You've got Mahomes at quarterback. Zay Jones is coming on at receiver. You've got Jamison Williams, who's going to be elite.
Super good.
And Austin Eckler was the number 1 fantasy running back yet again last year. You got to start coming up for some rings here. You just need that extra running back or two, and maybe a tight end.
Last year was painful, man. I had one game where I hiccuped, and that was the semifinals. If I would have made it that was my hiccup game. If I would have gotten past that game, I looked at the scores, I would have been, I think, the number 1 guy in championship week. So my team just
definitely wasn't me.
Week. Yep,
definitely wasn't me.
My team hiccuped in that semis.
Yep. Just need that second running back. I feel like
sounds like we might be talking after the show.
I think I'm getting it, depending on where my running backs went this offseason, buddy.
All right, back to the list here. So number 8, Jalen Darden, North Texas. Number 7, Michael Crabtree, obviously great
receiver.
2007 season. Yeah, he's the first one to hit that 30 mark in points per game, fantasy points per game with a half PPR. So 30.4 for Crabtree in 07. And then Troy Edwards from Louisiana Tech. And this was 1997, 102 catches, 1,700 yards, 13 touchdowns, and 3 more on the ground.
I believe Troy Edwards had an okay career. He was up with the Steelers.
Yep.
But definitely wasn't somebody that put up those kind of numbers. But at least he was a serviceable receiver for the 49ers for a little bit. I mean, for the Steelers for a little bit.
Yep.
All right, so let's go to number 5.
Justin Blackman.
Top 5. You want to take him there, Doug? Justin Blackman at 5.
Oh, man, I've got good and bad memories about this guy. In college, obviously, I mean, he was great. He had 2 great years in college. And, it says here, 111 catches, 1,782 yards, and 20 touchdowns. And he added a touchdown on the ground. But he was one of those guys in college that, I mean, he was an athletic freak, built like a house. For a receiver, everything you would want. And then me being a trusty Jags fan, I was super excited. And then the guy just couldn't get out of his own way and make bad decisions, But as far as playing goes, even when he was on the field in the pros, he was great. Just couldn't stay out of his way. But I liked watching Justin Blackman play a lot. He was an incredible receiver.
All right, so we're going to do number
4. Does anyone know Alex Van Dyke, Nevada, 1995? I
think you can scroll up and hit 3 and 4 together because you got 2 guys, both from Nevada, 2 guys that really, I don't think that those names. I mean, back in the day, Nevada, the Big West, that was still FCS at that time. The Big West was not even in the FBS ranks. But, we got him on here.
Cheating on this list.
Nevada's cheating on the list. Trevor Inslee at 3, the only guy with over 2,000 yards in a season that makes our list. That is an incredible amount. Obviously, back at this time, there wasn't even college fantasy football. There wasn't even college fantasy football.
You would expect another number, though, with the receiving yards like that. You would expect his touchdown numbers to be huge. It's just crazy to me that it's only 13.
This just goes to show that even back in that time, this is why Nevada is so high on the overall ranks as well. Nevada just puts a lot of guys onto this list, but did they do anything once they got out of Nevada? No, they did not. Up to number 2.
Yep.
Up to number 2. We go to Manny Hazard from Houston, 142 yards, 1,689, or 142
catches.
receptions, 1,689 yards. If I remember correctly, I feel like Manny Hazard was there when David Klingler was there, which we talked about earlier, that Klingler was one of the biggest reaches that did not
Wasn't
pan
that
out
Andre
in the
Ware's
pros.
season?
Was that what it was? Was that Andre Ware?
Let me double check that for you.
Let's put it this way: whether it's Andre Ware or whether it is David Klingler, there are two quarterbacks that played at Houston that did absolutely nothing in the pros. So again, this is why when you get to Case Keenum and you get to Patrick Mahomes, why everybody was very nervous about them translating their game from college to pro, because you've got tons and tons of guys back in that era that just never were able to translate that incredible college game over into the pros.
Yeah,
so,
that is Ware's Heisman year. So
okay.
33.8. That might be the best quarterback receiver fantasy stack that we have on this list. But that could be challenged, I'm sure. So number one, I'll give it to you, Matt. 39. This is another one that like dwarfs number two, just like the running backs. It's crazy.
And it's incredible. Troy Edwards from Louisiana Tech. Again, we talked about L Tech being up on the top 10 list. This is probably why. You got Troy Edwards from Louisiana Tech putting 2 in the top 6. And if you take out those Big West things, you got 2 in the top 4.
Yep.
For Louisiana Tech, 140 receptions, 1,996 yards. So you're talking about over the course of 1997 and 1998, 242 receptions and 3,700 yards receiving and 40 touchdowns receiving for Troy Edwards. That is incredible. And talk about some consistency. That's the kind of guy, I guarantee you, that if myself or Doug or Brian or any of you guys that are watching or listening to this podcast have this dude on your team or a guy like this, fill in the blank kind of name, and you have him on your team, you're like, this guy's going to lead me to a pro championship. Then he gets onto your pro roster and he doesn't do squat.
Right.
Unbelievable. Yep. So if anything else you guys want to talk about what's on this list, otherwise we'll go to some of the the wrap-up questions that we have.
Yeah, let's go straight to the wrap-up questions.
All right. So B-Mac, we're going to go to you first. Looking at the list, what stands out to you? We've kind of already covered some of these, but let's just make sure
a little bit. So I've got a couple others that I didn't cover there in the opening, but Travis McGriff being on this list from the 1998 Gators, that was surprising. I knew he was really good, and I watched every game, but I didn't realize in terms of fantasy he was putting up over 20 a game. Jeff Samardzija was surprising to see. Like, I remember him being good at Notre Dame, but his 2005 season makes the list. And then Sterling Sharp, obviously great NFL player, incredible talent, but his 1986 season for South Carolina was better than Jalen Hyatt's season was this year as a tight end. So, wait, is that right? Tight end or receiver? Sterling Sharp, was his brother the tight end or he was the tight end? I can't remember.
Sterling Sharp was the receiver. Shannon Sharp was the tight end.
Shannon Sharp was the tight end. Okay, so anyways, receiver for South Carolina. 1,110, better than Jalen Hyatt again this year. And then the other thing that's surprising, as you just think about the list in the draft this year, Jackson Smith and Jigba coming in at number 224 is not surprising. He had an incredible season. But from the perspective of this past year in the NFL, where Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson, two of the standout rookie receivers, were also healthy and on that team. And both have recently been quoted as saying JSN's better than them. That's going to be super incredible. If you can trade for him, do it. I would if Uncle Joe didn't have him. I'd try and make a trade for him.
For me, we touched on it earlier, as opposed to the quarterback and running backs list where you're looking at, future NFL Hall of Famers or actual NFL Hall of Famers. You look at the top 10 list, and there's literally one guy in the top 10, Devontae Smith, that is really anything in the pros. If you take out those two Nevada guys, you could squeeze your way down to Randy Moss and Devontae Adams as well. But in quarterbacks and running backs, you're talking about guys that everybody knows. And wide receivers, it's a completely different story. I still think that, again, Jarrett Stearns at number 27, he's the top guy from the 2021 season, came in at number 27, and he's a guy that I guarantee you ask anybody that does pro fantasy football, they've never even heard of his name. Never even heard his name, and the guy had an absolutely incredible video game season just 1 year ago in college. What about you, Doug? What was surprising for you on the list or players on the list?
So, like I mentioned before, something surprising to me, honestly, was so many players that I've never heard of. And I mean, I guess not too surprising because there's so many receivers in college football. One of the biggest surprises to me is somebody that's not on the list. Honestly, a guy who I loved watching play, growing up was like a player like Tim Brown, who played at Notre Dame. His best season was 900 yards receiving and 5 touchdowns at Notre Dame. And then we see what he did. We see what he did in the pros. He was virtually a guy that you couldn't cover. And so to me, it's more surprising as a player like that who's not on the list, who had an amazing NFL career, as opposed to, like we said, people at number 1 on this list who were good, amazing in college and did nothing in the pros. So that's, I guess, what's surprising to me about the list is the guys that are not on this.
Yeah, that's always one of those things too, is right fit at the right place. You think about recruiting, you think about draft, and now you think about the transfer portal. What if Joe Burrow never transferred to LSU, and what if LSU didn't get the offensive or quarterback coach there to kind of match and make that magical season with Chase and Jefferson and all them? There's a lot of what ifs, and it's crazy to think about it in terms of you just gotta get fortunate to get in the right offense, and you got to be smart enough coming out of high school with everyone trying to get you to pick the best offense where you're going to get playing time, where you're going to get coached up right, and all that stuff. Super intriguing.
So favorite players on the list from back in the day, for me, obviously Randy Moss, Devontae Adams, and then being NC State guy, Torry Holt. Love seeing Torry Holt get on the list. What about you guys? What about you, Doug? We'll go to you first.
I've got Torry Holt on the list as well. Again, I'm kind of new to the college scene, newer, but I just remember watching him in his Rams days, and he was an incredible receiver in the pros, and I loved watching that offense. Percy Harvin was super exciting for me, being a Gator fan. I felt like there was nothing that guy couldn't do on the football field. Him and even the Demps days, having 2 of the fastest players I've ever seen in my life in that offense, it was fun to watch. But then one that I've got on there that a lot of people probably know, but kind of I feel like he's forgotten about. Jordy Nelson. I was a huge fan of Jordy Nelson. I felt like he was one of the first guys, in my opinion, that showed how important somebody's hands can be as a receiver. I just felt like his hands were glue. I loved watching him play. So Jordy Nelson was probably one of my all-time favorite receivers to watch.
Yeah, for me, it's just growing up, in the 90s as a Gators fan, living in Central Florida. Those years were just incredible. But the combination of Florida receivers that made the list was still kind of surprising to me, because you think about how much the passing game in college football has changed since the 90s and how much more teams on average pass it. But still, Riddell Anthony, Ike Hilliard, Jaquez Green all made the list from that, Werfel offense. And then a couple of Rex Grossman's best receivers made the list. Jabbar Gaffney, Rashae Caldwell. And then, of course, Percy, too, he's one of my favorite players of all time, and the way he was used in that offense. Because this list does count your rushing stats, too, obviously. And Percy has his 2 best seasons made the top 500 all time.
All right. So favorite players you owned on the list. Doug, who's some of your favorite players that you owned that are on here?
Well, I don't have many. So I got this guy recently in a trade with BMAC, Allen Robinson. He's been a favorite. I wish he was somebody that the Jags would bring back, to be honest. But he was one of my favorites on my fantasy team. And then, of course, arguably the best receiver in the pros right now, I've got Justin Jefferson. So he's just one that, I can't – he's kind of like your guys, your Devontae's, Matt, like somebody that might go down in my Hall of Fame. I've gotten some pretty, for lack of a better term, ding-dong trade offers for this guy, and I don't think that he's ever going to go away unless somebody offers me top-tier talent. You know what I mean? So, but he's probably one that's going to retire with me, to be honest.
Yeah. So that needs to be our name. Somebody offers a ridiculous trade. It's the ding dong trade offer.
Oh, make an award out of it. I like this.
I'm doing
it. So, of the top 100 guys, there were 7 of them that I've had on my fantasy team. So that's just who I listed here. My favorite guys, or guy on the list, obviously, I mentioned Percy Harvin, who I had. He was like, when we started the league, he was my second round pick. I remember I took Stafford, he was a freshman, and then Harvin, he was a freshman. I believe that's how the first 2 rounds of our original draft went. But yeah, Randy Moss, who I didn't have in our CFB league, but I had him a lot in the NFL. Tavon Austin, Jamar Chase, Corey Coleman, Amari Cooper, Percy, and Corey Davis all made the top 100 and killed it for me. Loved it.
Yeah, so I had Josh Doxson, Jonathan Adams, who on this list is at 102, but he probably would sneak up there with a recount into the top 100. Obviously, we've already talked about the double Devontae situation with Smith and Adams. There was a lot of guys in the mids, like I said, Josh Doxson was at 32. Torry Holt is somebody that obviously never had him in a college fantasy situation because he was prior to college fantasy even existing. But yeah, then for me, a lot of the guys are wide receivers are probably going to hit in the 200 to 300 range because I've got guys that did great in college and just never amounted to much past there. So BMAC, you got a question you wanted to ask. You want to pose these questions every single one of these podcasts. What's your question? Your one-on-one question you got for this one?
All right. So if you had to get one player to go one-on-one with Deion Sanders, whether it's a game or a play, with your life on the line, who you got? This is college Deion and college receiver.
I would go with Devontae Adams at his prime at Fresno State as my top guy. But I would also have Jamar Chase for his 1 year at LSU because I feel like Jamar Chase is just such an incredibly strong receiver and he was so insane in that year. But I don't think I could go wrong with either one of those guys. It'd be a coin flip for Devontae or Jamar. And part of my thought process there is I wasn't going to pick a guy that was short because you didn't want to go picking somebody that was going to have to out jump and already have a height disadvantage. I wanted somebody that was tall and strong like Devontae and Jamar Chase.
Yeah, it was. And if you haven't seen Deion at FSU, he was incredible. That was our first TikTok that we posted not too long ago. I think this was like right around the Super Bowl, maybe, as we haven't had that account for very long. And it's a short on our YouTube channel too, which if you are hanging out with us right now and this far into the pod and you haven't subscribed, please do it. It doesn't really affect you at all. And then grab your mom's phone and do the same thing. But yeah, for me, it's Randy Moss. Like it was a no-brainer. Like I'm gonna ride with the guy he's definitely one of the fastest and one of the best jumpers and best hands combination. Like one-on-one, I'll go with Moss on anybody, even though it's Deion who's freaking elite.
What about
you, for me, I've got the Justin Blackmon in college. Like I said,
what?
He was super built, super strong, hard to cover really by anybody. And even when he played in the pros, man, when he played, he looked great. But because the controversy, I'm going another controversial pick here as my second, and I'm going Percy Harvin. He was so shifty. Good luck covering the guy. That's all I can say. I know Dion was great, but I don't think Dion had to play against a guy like that. So, you know what I mean? But my main guy, I'm going Justin Blackmon, just because I like, the body style of a receiver like that. It just kind of reminds me of an A.J. Brown nowadays, or DK Metcalf, just super strong. Challenge me for the ball, I'm going to get it, is basically how I look at that.
Yep.
All right, so that is our look at the top 500 and the top 25 wide receiver seasons of all time. But we want to know what you guys think. We want you guys to go to the Discord channel, look for CFB Dynasty. Let us know your thoughts, the things that stand out to you, the things that you think maybe we might have overlooked. Go become a part of the CFB Dynasty group that's there. We also want you to like and subscribe to CFBDynasty.com and be able to get this information at your disposal, so that way you can get a leg up on your league when your season comes around. So before we head on out today, BMAC, do you have any news and notes about the CFB Dynasty website, updates that you've done to the site that you want to make sure people know about?
Yeah, we haven't published them like in the Discord yet. We have, and we probably will like shortly, and we haven't published them on social in a while, but they've been live and available for you guys. So it's basically our for lack of a better term, our teaser rankings. Basically, it's not enough to draft off of, but there are top 25 at each position for quarterbacks, running backs, and wide receivers are live for your standard CFF league. And then if you're in like a Devy or Dynasty league, we've got quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, tight ends all up to date. And then just below that, under the rankings tab, would be these all-time greats that we're talking about. So, yeah, go on there, check it out. Let me know what you think, who you think we missed, if you think we have someone too high, too low, that kind of stuff. It's always fun to chat about kind of going into, spring practice, where we'll get some spring games and some good notes about some players that are really showing out in practice.
Also with CFB, if I can add too, guys, can't stress it enough, subscribe to all the channels, because, Twitter, YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, all that stuff, because we're going to get pretty heavy into some fun social posts pretty soon. And it's going to be really exciting for us to look at. We'll get pretty heavy into them. So it's going to be some fun stuff to look at, some videos to watch, maybe players that bring back your childhood, things like that. So definitely subscribe to all the channels, because we're going to try to push some social stuff here pretty soon.
All right, so our next show is upcoming. We're going to be talking about the next man up, the best of 2023. And I can tell you right now, there's a lot of them that were incredible guys that were not really on the radar at the beginning of the season. Quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers. I can tell you there's a guy that's in the top 5 going into the draft this year, ranked in the top 5 receivers, that was not really on the radar at the beginning of the season, but he is a top 5 wide receiver candidate into the NFL draft this year. So I think those are going to be some great shows. Next man up, QB, running back, wide receiver. BMAC, you got anything you want to add, any teasers you want to add about that to get people psyched up and ready for those shows when we get to them?
It ain't Kayshon Boutte, who is supposed to be a top 5 receiver. I'll tell you that much. No, go check it out, and let's chat about it. But yeah, we'll get into the next man up. It's going to be fun. Some of the stuff, it's just going to be news as it comes out. Like, you got Devin Brown versus Kyle McCord at Ohio State. Who's going to fill the shoes of C.J. Stroud, and who's going to fill the shoes of Bryce Young? Like, there's some massive, massive positions that not only will they change the landscape of college fantasy, but college football in general. Like, are you going to roll with all of these guys from these big schools? Are they going to have a new guy take over and take their team to the playoff, or will we have a total shakeup this year? It's going to be a lot of fun to watch.
For the record, for those of you who don't know who I'm talking about Jalen Hyatt from Tennessee. Last year, started off the season, was not somebody that was really in the list, and then you have Tillman go down with an injury. Jalen Hyatt was the next man up in 2022. He's now ranked as a top 5 wide receiver going into the NFL draft. So these next man up lists, obviously we're talking about guys that have graduated or left the team or have transferred. These next man up lists are huge. You got to make the right decision. If you were somebody that thought you were going to get the next man up as a wide receiver at Alabama last year in 2022, you probably were not happy with your squad. So hopefully we can help you to find that next man up.
I know one of those guys.
Yeah, I bet you do. I'm going to tell you, last year was the first time I haven't had an Alabama wide receiver in a while, and I fortunately was happy about that.
Yep.
Me too, because I listened to the other people complain about it, and it made me happy.
All right, so with that being said, this is the end of this podcast. On behalf of Doug Gravely and BMAC Brian McElfresh, my name is Matt Knowles. We thank you guys. Don't forget to go like, subscribe to all the different channels, TikTok, Facebook, Twitter, anywhere you can, YouTube, at CFB Dynasty or at CFB Dynasty _. We thank you for listening. We really appreciate you guys being a part of this community. This is CFBDynasty.com. See ya.
See you guys.